Hello and welcome to Dovetail Learning's We Are Resilient. Agreements create a path out of conflict. I'm Meri McCoy-Thompson, Executive Director, and I'm very happy to have you with us today as we talk about these important collaborating skills that can help us with so many things in our life. And just to let you know, we're recording this, so you'll be able to watch it in the future. So our mission at Dovetail Learning is strengthening resilience in adults and children, and our vision is a world of kind, connected human beings. All of our materials are open educational resources, which means you can download them and use them for free, adapt them for use in your community. All we ask is that you give attribution, you collaborate and share back the materials you create with our work, and you use the same license when you publish anything with our work in it. A little bit about me. I have two adult children, one who was just married last year and one who's going to be married this year. And I've lived and worked for nonprofits all over the world in education and healthcare and other fields. My mission is to help empower others to live their best life. I just said goodbye to my mother with Alzheimer's 2 weeks ago, and I have a cat. I want to appreciate you for being you, for handling all the challenges that come up, and for taking care of the people around you, for caring. Our agenda today, we're going to spend a few minutes looking at what causes conflict, kind of what it seems like conflict is, but more importantly, what's actually happening underneath most conflicts in the world. And then I want to look at how we can create a path forward, remembering that blaming and shaming never works, though it feels good and seems like the thing we're supposed to do, but really focusing our resilient mindset, particularly the resilient mindset of curiosity and how that can help us. And then take a deeper dive into the two collaborating skills of seeking agreements and honoring agreements, and how those sets of skills can really help remove so many of the conflicts we have in our life. So I also want to say that this is as I said, an open educational resource, and it's an open meeting. So feel free to put in your questions in the chat. Feel free to put any other information you have in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll try to address it as we go along. And okay, so let's look at conflict. So sometimes we're meeting people and it just feels like gimme, gimme, gimme. They have something and we're just like, oh, we feel conflicted about them. Sometimes it's offensive statements and they're like, oh, there's things that really get under our skin, the things that people are saying. Sometimes it's things like, oh, you never do this, or I want, or blank needs to happen, all sorts of things. A couple of types of conflicts we're going to talk about today, just to give you a hint of how this can work in your life. We're going to talk about parenting and bedtime conflicts that can happen in parenting. Just another example, I'll talk about moving, like whether you should move or not move, and maybe if you're trying to figure that out with a spouse, just as an example of how that could work. And also, like if you're in a work or professional situation, who has ownership of a particular project? That can also, just as an example of the kind of conflicts that can come up. All those conflicts, when we're in the middle of them, they can really make our hearts stir and feel really uncomfortable. We need to take a big step back and look at what could be happening underneath that might be causing some of these conflicts. So let's start by looking inside. When we look inside, we understand that we as human beings actually have two types of patterns that are happening. We have our cultural patterns and our protective patterns. Those are all inside of us, and they're how we view the world and how we react to the world. Let's start with our cultural patterns. Our cultural patterns are how we view the world. So they're how we see all the things that happen to us and the things that are happening other people are doing. What are they? They're messages about how to act or not act in the world. They form our beliefs, our attitudes, and our behavior. They're passed down in family and communities, and they inform our identities, cultural patterns, okay? They're made up of all sorts of things, everything from our ethnicity and language, racial constructs, social economic status, our political affiliation, religious tradition, our community norms, gender identity, sexual orientation, all the family stories. All of those things have information for us about how we should be, what things we should do, what things we shouldn't do. And that's how we form our cultural patterns about what is supposed to happen in the world. all of our cultural patterns are unique to us. Even if we're in the same family, we can have completely different cultural patterns on some things. They're integral to our identity. They're very tender to us. But understanding that they exist, and that's how we view the world in this big everybody should do or should not do lens, helps us understand where conflicts come from. Our cultural patterns can be really helpful. They give us our core values. This is what's important to me. This is what I believe in. They also provide shortcuts and understanding and how to navigate the world, what behavior should be, what behavior shouldn't be, like, oh, this is what I should wear today. This is how I should do my hair. This is what my hygiene should be. This is what kind of drink I should have. This is that I should be drinking or not drinking while I'm giving a webinar. All those things are part of our cultural patterns, right? They help us feel like we belong to a group of people with whom we feel safe. So they're super helpful. They also can harm us because we have such strong cultural patterns by definition. They can prevent us from seeing other people's truth. So other people have other cultural patterns which they believe they should act, people should be doing, and we have different ones. And those judgments can limit our ability to really engage with others, and they block us from seeing people who they are, who they could be for us, who they could be for the world. Just an example, some people come from an ask cultural pattern. Anything is available, we can just ask. Can I borrow your car? I'd like to, can I borrow your shoes? Will you take me to the mall? Would you drive me to the airport? Everything's okay. Other people, that's completely offensive. Do not ask until you already know the answer. I'm only ask someone to, if I can go to the airport with them, if I know that they'll drive me or I know it's okay. Right? Another thing that people can have is a cultural pattern around collective versus individual. I am going to provide a collective view of something when I say, this is good for the family, you should do it. And other people only do what's good for yourself. Don't pay attention to what your family needs or your community. And both of those are fine. Those are just, as Ronald said, they're unconscious and programmed through implicit memory. Absolutely. Other people call them unconscious bias. They're all sorts of things. Sarah has asked me to slow down a little bit. I'm sorry I'm talking so quickly. I will say I will provide a recording, which will be helpful, and you'll get all the slides. So all of that can be helpful for you. So thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. Also, I want, some people feel like as long as they say I want, that's okay. And other people, no, don't express your needs and desires. That's uncomfortable. That's not a part of what society needs. All of these are part of our cultural patterns, and together they can make us have completely different views of other people, which of course can create clashing. Okay. And the other thing I want to say is all this material is available on our website in different forms. So there's a lot of ways to get more information about any of these subjects. I'm putting them all together quickly just as an introduction to what our work's about. So how are cultural patterns important? The most important thing is when we can notice when our cultural patterns are influencing us, or notice when cultural patterns influence others, we're less likely to judge them, and we're more able to find ways out of conflict because we can understand, oh, that's a cultural pattern. That's how they're acting this way. That's why I'm acting this way. For example, let's talk about this bedtime issue that I said I would bring up. So I had this issue with my husband a lot when my children were little. What time should our children go to bed? My cultural pattern was get children to bed on time, early, so they can stay healthy and well. My husband's cultural pattern was children are a gift. We should play with them and enjoy them. He came home from work and wanted to play with our kids and let's not worry about bedtime. Caused a lot of conflict about us when we were young because of with just those different cultural patterns, right? I was talking about moving. Another conflict I had with my husband is whether we should move from our current house or not. He wanted to move to something that was more comfortable with his cultural pattern. My cultural pattern made me completely comfortable in the house we are in because it made me feel like a house I grew up in. And it's just different cultural patterns. In fact, I was nervous about being in the kind of cultural pattern that he grew up in. We just had different ones, which most people do. So it's just an example of helping to understand that. Then once we understood that, we can take the heat down a little bit and talk about the conversation in a calmer way. And I also talked about if we're having a conflict at work, who should have ownership about a particular product? So if you have a cultural pattern that the hierarchy determines everything, then whatever your boss tells you, that's the way you're going to do. Other people have the cultural pattern of whoever knows the best, they should have ownership no matter where they are in the hierarchy. Totally different cultural pattern can be okay. It's just important to notice, oh, I'm having a conflict with you because I think because I know more about the project, I should have ownership. You think because you're higher up in the hierarchy, you should have ownership of the project. Just an example of how cultural patterns can influence us on these type of topics. So how does this play out? Well, the other thing that can influence us when we're in the middle of a conflict is noticing our stress reaction. So we're going along and for example, I'm trying to get the kids ready for bed and boom, my husband walks in and starts playing with them. My protective patterns can emerge. I might lose my cool, take a while to calm down, and then I feel depleted. Or you might be working at your desk and your coworker comes in and takes ownership of something you thought you had. That's a stress event. Your protective patterns might emerge. Your peak might happen and you might take a while to be depleted. Yes. Nanfuka mentions that her cultural pattern is showering, eating, and sleeping on time, and her husband's pattern is completely different. And yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. We all have those different patterns. Thanks for noticing that. So back to the losing our cool thing, when we notice that we've noticed our stress reaction, we've lost our cool, what is that about? Let's look at our protective patterns a little more. They give us our reactive resilience. Our protective patterns emerge when we feel unsafe, whether that's physically, emotionally, socially, mentally, or economically. In other words, vulnerable or something happens and how do we react, right? All of us have sort of some go-to things, and then all of us also may use some of the other things depending on the circumstances. What kind of protective patterns are we talking about? These are 6 protective patterns that we've named: distrusting, hypervigilance, hypercaretaking, avoiding, defending, and attacking. All of us can do these different things at different times. Most of us have 1 or 2 that we do more often than others. So what is distrusting? That's, do I doubt myself or others? You know, if something happened, for example, distrusting, if my husband says, my children are going to be fine, it's okay if they always stay up late, I might move into distrusting, like, okay, I distrust whether I know as a mother that my kid might get sick or not, maybe I don't, or maybe I move into hypervigilance. I'm a high alert. My children are going to be sick if we don't get them to bed, and so I move into hypervigilance. Just an example. Or hypervigilance. Am I on constant high alert? Maybe about my project. Maybe I'm hypervigilant at work and somebody comes in and they do what I think they're going to take away my project. And so I'm always looking for someone who's going to take away my project. Maybe I'm afraid of losing my job. All those things can happen. Hyper caretaking. Do I over prioritize others at the expense of my own? A lot of times people in the caretaking profession do this. If you're a doctor or a nurse or a teacher, I'll give everything to other people and then I have nothing else. Sometimes people do that with their family. Oh, I'm just going to do everything for my family and at the end of the day, I'm just depleted. But sometimes we move into hyper caretaking as a way of avoiding our own emotions, right? I said those are protective patterns that come up in conflict. So rather than dealing with the conflict, I move to hyper caretaking. Or rather than dealing with the conflict, I might move to avoiding. So if I'm doing avoiding at work and somebody comes in and starts talking about the project, maybe I'm pretend I just don't even listen to them. Maybe I don't respond to the emails. Maybe I pretend I'm in a meeting, that I don't return their calls because I don't want to deal with that conflict. Another way of dealing with the conflict is defending. I act like others are constantly criticizing and judging me. Somebody comes in and they say, can we talk about the project for work? And I'm like, I don't think I have anything to say, or I just feel very defensive. And maybe they just asked a simple question, but my response is very defensive. Or one of my go-to protective patterns is attacking. So if my husband was saying, okay, we're going to put the kids to bed too late. Why do you think the kids should go to late? Why do you always do that? I don't think you should put the kids to bed. That's the protective pattern that I tend to have. All of those things, distrusting, hypervigilance, hyper-caretaking, avoiding, defending, and attacking. When we move into a protective pattern, sometimes it can be helpful, just like cultural patterns. Sometimes it's the right choice for the right time. Other times it's a road to conflict that's not helpful in the situation. For both of our protective patterns and our cultural patterns, the big thing that we need to do is notice whether it's working for us. Notice what we're doing, notice what other people are doing, and is that leading to conflict or is it leading to a path out of conflict? And thinking about it, we're the only ones who can make the decision about whether it's working for us or not, but to become more aware and self-aware about what's happening for us within ourselves, our protective patterns and our cultural patterns, that's what helps us create an understanding of what the conflict is about. And just knowing every human being has impeccable reasons for being exactly who they are, whether they're cultural patterns passed down in families, protective patterns, which are also often passed down in families or communities. And that's why they have the vision for the world that they think they should be having, even if it's completely different than ours. So just a reminder, what causes conflict? We have different perspectives on how we should be in the world and how others should be in the world. We may feel unsafe or vulnerable, even if we haven't identified that for ourselves, and maybe that's how we react, or maybe the person we're in a conflict feels unsafe or vulnerable, and that's why they're reacting the way they do. Often we don't have the skills to do with our cultural protective patterns. And then the other thing to keep in mind, often the surface conflict is not the true conflict. So let's say we're talking about bedtime for my children. Is the conflict really about bedtime, or is it maybe about who knows best for parenting for our kids in that particular moment? When we're talking about moving, is the conflict about whether we should actually do the move, or maybe the conflict is about the bigger issue of how we want to live our lives together and what our values are? Ownership of work, is it really about the ownership of the particular project, or is it about autonomy at work, or whether we can get something done, or how we feel in a work environment? So often surface conflict is not the true conflict. It's important to understand it because sometimes people come in, and I've seen this so often, for example, with preschoolers, like, oh, you want to play with the toy? Well, you play it for 10 minutes and you play for 10 minutes, and then we've solved the conflict. Well, maybe the conflict really wasn't about the toy itself, and if the kids actually had a chance to resolve it themselves, they would come up with something that's at a deeper level. So just to keep in mind, so often we have this rational mind, this rider on the elephant, and we think if we just present the right arguments and everything will, our rational mind will lead us to the right place. It can be helpful, but so often we ignore our intuitive, holistic body emotions that are really the cause of the conflict. Just an important thing to keep in mind. All of that about the underlying causes of conflict. What can we do to create a path forward in conflict? Let's think about that, okay? So let's use our resilient mindsets, first of all. Our resilient mindsets of curiosity, choice, and courage. So first of all, curiosity is basically, how am I being? What don't I know? And recognizing that there's so much that we don't know, so much we don't recognize about ourselves. When we use the resilient mindset of choice, it's what empowering choice can I make in this situation? And when we use the resilient mindset of courage is, what kind of person do I want to be? How can I align my values with who I want to be? Those resilient mindsets guide us in using our patterns and our skills. They're very important as an overall approach. Diving deeper into curiosity, it's really, what don't I know about this? So let's go back to this conflict of bedtime. What don't I know about this? I don't know, like, maybe why my husband's come in and wants to stir the kids up. Maybe he's feeling like he doesn't spend enough time with the kids and we can solve the problem in a different way. I don't know about what his view of bedtime is. There's just so many things, cultural and protective patterns. I don't know about this. And so acknowledging that, and maybe I don't know what's actually going on in me that's causing all this consternation about bedtime. Or if we're looking at this ownership of workflow at work, what don't I know? I don't know why my person who I'm in conflict about the ownership, I don't know what they're actually thinking and feeling behind that, right? So understanding that and asking questions, being curious about myself. How am I being? Am I being defensive? Am I being hyper caretaking? Am I being judgmental? And then for others, help me understand why you think it's important that the kids have a bedtime of 9 o'clock or whatever. Help me understand why you think it's important for us to move. May I ask a clarifying question about the ownership of this project at work? Can I ask how you feel about that? So it's important to understand and use curiosity to ask those clarifying questions. Curiosity opens us up to new possibilities. When we admit we don't actually know a lot about ourselves and others, we start being curious about that. It prepares us for using the resilient mindsets of centering, connecting, and collaborating. when we're curious about our stress reaction, like what the hell happened? I moved into this protective pattern, and we can start managing our stress curve. We can say, okay, is that useful? Was it useful that I avoided that comment and kind of left the room? Or was it better if I choose a resilience skill and move into whether it's centering or connecting that can help me feel calm and centered, and we can have a real conversation instead of me avoiding it or attacking you around that. Just to remember, our body's stress response is triggered more by the perceived stress when we move into protective pattern than the actual event or whatever the person actually said. What kind of skills can we use for resilience? Let's dive into these collaborating skills. Let's dive into them. For example, we have all sorts of issues, whether it's to handle holidays, chores, parenting, professional, our daily workflow, projects, assignments, all these things are just examples of types of conflicts that often come up for people, right? And if we want to start to seek and honor agreements, what would that look like for those kinds of things? As I said, there are 2 of our 5 collaborating skills. Noticing group, appreciating others, and contributing intentionally are also super helpful for collaborating. And on our website, we have many materials about all the rest of this information. Seeking agreements. Our tagline here is same page, same chapter, same book. And if we're curious, it's just thinking, what are my assumed agreements here? So often, so example, let's pick the bedtime thing. My assumed agreements that I would be in charge of bedtime, and my husband is just coming here and interrupting it. There's no agreement in that. I have this assumption that that's what I think. I never talked to him about it. I've never, had a big conversation. What agreements are missing is like, okay, who gets to determine? How are we going to do this? What explicit agreements would be help around the bedtime issue is if my husband and I had sat down and really talked about how are we going to do the process, what works for him, what works for me, instead of just this constant battle because we were both really tired as young parents are, right? And if for example, workflow, my assumed agreement, my boss's assumed agreement, maybe they have complete control and I'm just supposed to execute. And the missing agreement is like, what's my role in this? How can we come up with something that we both feel good about? Those kind of explicit agreements would really help so we can work well together and achieve our purpose. And together, if we seek and name agreements, we can make such a big difference on these type of things. They can support our co-creation, whether it's the workflow, the parenting, the bedtime, the chores, whatever else we're going to do. We need to have curiosity both on the purpose and task. What needs to get done? For example, our children are getting to bed, right? That needs to get done. Who will do it and how? We need to have agreements on that. But we also need agreements around cultural and dynamics. How are we going to be together? For example, we can have around the bedtime, we could have had an agreement that if one of us wants to change something, we're going to say, hey, can I request a change? Just that simple cultural dynamics. That's how we're going to be together. Instead of assuming this or being mad about that, we're going to have a timeout and request. Just that simple thing can change the cultural dynamics that we constantly had, as an example. In agreements, just an example, we might have agreements to reserve judgments or confidentiality. We're not going to talk about this problem with other people. Maybe healthy boundaries. This is the boundaries that I need to hold. That we're going to ask questions instead of make assumptions or assume positive intent. Even though it feels like you're attacking me, I understand you're actually looking for the best of our children. That's assuming positive intent. Giving space and time. All those things are just examples of the kind of agreements about how we could be together when we're trying to solve a problem. And explicitly naming them makes all the difference, right? You can put in the chat, like what kind of agreements are missing in your work or life, right? There's all sorts of things it could be. If you want to put anything in the chat, I'm leaving a little space for that. Can give you examples of what they could be, right? Like I said, agreements about our team, about how we will work together. Absolutely, so important. It's amazing how taking the time out can save so much time later if we just take the time with our team members to have 15 minutes can save hours and hours, right? And even if you're in the middle saying, stop, can we stop in the middle of our work and say, I want to have an agreement with my team about this? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let's finish one role at a time. Exactly. Ron, I will help you. I will reach out to you again and we'll have a conversation about your needs for the artwork. Yeah, I've been off for 2 weeks, so I haven't been able to reach you on that. Okay. So anyway, examples of handling holidays, chores, conversations, parenting, as I said, also daily workflow, projects, meetings, and then all sorts of things can benefit from agreements. Okay. Seeking agreements. Just think about a recent conflict or group effort that don't go well, and think about the implicit assumptions that got in the way because you didn't have agreements. I was having a party with a friend. I bought all these decorations and I was so excited. But my implicit assumption was that I was the one going to buy the decorations. My friend didn't like them and she wanted to take them all back. We didn't have an agreement about who was going to do what or how we were going to talk about it. It's just an example of when a conflict comes up. So often it's because we didn't have the assumption. The research shows when you have agreements, people cooperate better and groups perform better. And agreements are groups that have agreements are better able to handle disruptive events and they're more positive. So with Sarah, if you have agreements in your team and something goes wrong, then when something goes wrong, you have a way to handle it so much better. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Didn't finish on time because of bad communication. Such an example, right? Yeah, agreements can make all the difference. And so what kind of practices? When we view misunderstanding as opportunities to seek agreements, say, oh, it feels like we don't understand the thing. Let's try to have an agreement, ask for clarification and create an agreement about how to move forward. It's so important, right? Setting aside time and asking for them, being clear about how not having agreements impacting you. And then when people come to you with problems, sometimes helping them think about agreements that might be missing. What are their expectations? Can they make their agreements more explicit? It's so universal. We can make a difference in this. I want to take a couple minutes to talk about our last skill here, honoring agreements. Following it through keeps us true. And the reality is, how do I honor my agreements with integrity? How can I best hold myself and others accountable to agreements with mutual respect? Because we talked about seeking them, but the issue is so often we can't actually do what we said we were going to do. We can, if we're going to honor agreements in one of two ways. We can do everything we said, keep our word on time, but we're human beings. We make mistakes all the time where things happen and things change. So as soon as we know that we can't do that, we inform everybody and we clean up any mess that we caused. So if our agreement was, my husband's agreement was, yes, I'm going to have the kids up to bed at 7:30 every time, right? And then something happens, whatever, and the kids don't get to bed to 8, telling me about it, telling me I'm sorry, oh my goodness, and we're going to do whatever mess that happened because they got to bed late. That's helping honor agreements. And for me to understand that, yeah, things are going to change. Agreements are never set in stone, but we're trying to communicate about that. That's the important part of honoring agreements. When do you have trouble honoring agreements? You can put that in the chat, if anything that helps you honor agreements. I will say that discussing agreements can lead to conflict. You might feel like you're going on a path into conflict because you're talking about agreements, but providing space for conflict can actually create more commitment in the long run. Just to recognize that responses to conflict, sometimes it can feel destructive, like winning, displaying anger, demeaning others, retaliating. Other people can feel like they're lying, right? That can be hard to honor agreements if you feel like the other person's not going to do it. But we can actually, if we're actually create solutions, express our emotions, reach out, adapt, those can be constructive ways to handle agreements, handle the conflict that can happen when we're talking about agreements, right? Benefit of conflict is it encourages a greater diversity of ideas, highlight critical points of discussion and contention, and helps people to understand opposing points of view, enhance a team's problem-solving capability, and can build a trust if the team is relatively functional. It's important to realize there's something what's called artificial harmony. When you think that everything's going well, but you're like, nobody says anything negative, that's actually artificial. Or this unhealthy conflict where everybody's having their protective patterns and their cultural patterns and everything's a mess. There's actually something in the middle called healthy conflict when we're actually talking comfortably about the things that are different. So Nanfuka talked about when the other party lies and how that can lead to difficulty in honoring agreements. Part of it is by naming someone as lying, you're already moving into blaming and shaming, right? You're already saying they're a horrible person, they're lying, they're shaming, instead of saying that person said something that didn't happen to be the truth. It didn't happen to turn that way, and try to get to the underlying conflict. What's happening here? Maybe in the end, we can't actually trust that other person. And so the distrusting protective pattern is helpful. And we say, okay, that's actually not going to work that way. But maybe there's other things that are going on. So it's just important to remember that when we blame and shame people, it's not helpful. But when we can use our protective patterns, it can be helpful. It's a lot of nuance here, a lot to work out. When we honor agreements, we might have to mind for conflict, going first to try to regain trust for people, confronting difficult issues, and focusing on what do we really want to get to happen in the end. Research shows groups perform better when they confront each other, when they break the norms, and when we renegotiate agreements and implicit ground rules, that helps the group adapt. Sarah mentions, I have trouble honoring agreements when my superiors change direction. Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, they've changed their direction. So then we just have a conversation. It seems like you wanted me to do this. I'm unsure about that. Can we have a conversation about this? This is what honoring agreements is really all about. Being curious about things stand, and here it is, asking them directly, hey, I thought you were going to turn in that project yesterday. Can you give me an update? Her superiors have changed direction. I thought we were doing this. Can we revise our agreements? That's what honoring agreements is. Can we revise our agreements? Because I was going to do this, and now it looks like you're going to do that. Sometimes it's just letting others know how you were impacted when the agreement's not met. Thank you for letting me know the project won't be done till Thursday. Since I don't have it, I won't be able to include it in my report to COO. Please update me sooner to avoid unrealistic expectations. It's good to let people know you were impacted. Maybe for Sarah, who's having trouble with her superiors, saying, okay, you've changed direction. That makes it difficult for me to get my work done. Can we have a conversation about what your expectation is and come up with new agreements that meet both what I can do and what your new expectation is? It's about checking in regularly to build accountability. I know it's easier said than done, but I do want to give you ideas about how it might work out. So just a reminder that to create a path out of conflict means noticing our protective patterns and our cultural patterns and choosing resilient mindset skills to help. The We Are Resilient is a whole conceptual framework that we can sort of put in our head. It also helps to integrate into our lived experience using our heart, and there's a lot of concrete tips about it using our hands. That's why we provide so many trainings. All of this is available on our website, both through videos and other things you can sign up for, resilient circles. You can sign up for other ways to learn about our work, and you can just watch our videos and read our books if you're interested. The resilient mindsets, as I said, they guide us in using our patterns and skills. Our protective patterns are how we react to the world. Our cultural patterns are how we view the world. And our skills, centering, connecting, and collaborating, are how we create the world we need. So Leti resources, as I said, they're all open educational resources. We have these books, Practical Skills for Resilience, and there's a lot of video learning and digital downloads available for you. So thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining my webinar, and thank you for all the questions and comments along the way. I really enjoyed interacting with you. And I will send an email out with the link to the video, link to all the slides. Feel free to email me back with any questions or comments, or set up a meeting with me. I'd love to talk with people too. Take care. Bye-bye.